In this training, I'm going to explain to you how to configure Weagree CLM, so the contract lifecycle management part of Weagree that you use for signed contracts. It has a prominent place in the top navigation. The CLM is essentially under My Signed Contracts, and if you search a contract which may be either in the contract creation part or in the CLM, you would use the Search tab in the top navigation. Before I'm going to explain to you how to configure the CLM, I'm going to quickly show you around in the CLM itself, so that you so as to highlight the features that you will need to configure later on. In the overview over here, you see a few aspects like the status of the contract and the priority for action. You can see the listing of the other parties. There are some notes to self that you can add, and there's a more expansive description in addition to the short description that you need for finding the documents. Then you see in the overview the most important contract in relation to a contract entry, and you have the possibility to immediately open the repository of a managed contract. Now, this is the overview of my managed contracts. There are also contracts for my colleagues, and I might access those as well if I wish. And if I click on just the arbitrary first listed contract, you will arrive on a general overview page with the core key details of this particular managed contract. In the left navigation bar, you find standard details that you might want to access quickly, and that are shown on the overview page over here. But in the left navigation, you may go in depth and have full list and have all the details that relate to it. If you then look at the right side part, you will see that there are first of all the key parameters to identify the contract, and there below that are certain parameters that relate to the expiry, contract number, approval status if that's relevant, and the urgency of a contract. You also see who is the contract owner and to which user group this contract relates. Then on the left side, you see, first of all, an item identifying the parties. You have the possibility to access the repository. Here you can upload additional files to the repository if any new documentation is relevant. You have the possibility to identify and change who is involved, so the stakeholders who are involved in managing the contract. And then there are some distribution contracts related aspects specific to distribution agreements, or at least we have brought them here under items like the business aspects of pricing, IP rights, and legal aspects, probably related to a dispute resolution and likes. If there are any tasks, you can see them over here. And now it's up to you to configure the Weagree CLM. If you've not been able to find this and there's no tab in the top navigation, well, then in any event, we would go to the administrator page where, first of all, you need to make sure that everything is visible. If you click on Configuration Weagree Wizard, you should have the CLM, Contract Lifecycle part, activated, so with the switch being green. There are a few functionalities that relate to contract lifecycle management. For example, the migration service for migrating external CLMs into the Weagree CLM. Then you would need to have the migration service activated. Then you may want to have contracts assigned an automated contract number. So contract numbers created and assigned by Weagree. There's a separate tutorial for how that works, but if you want to use Weagree contract numbers, you need to have this switched on. Same for confidentiality of contracts. If you want to enable users to mark a contract confidential, invisible for their colleagues, you should switch this one on, but also for that is a separate tutorial not to be addressed in this training. Then you would go for the configuration of your CLM contract sheets, as we call them. And in this CLM, what you see is that there are various contract sheets defined. By default, you will find only one contract sheet, which would be the general, typically for non-allocated contracts, contract sheet. Here's your first question to be answered, which is, am I going to work with one contract sheet, or do I want to manage my contracts through several contract sheets? This may be an important question, because in a contract sheet, you define those CLM fields on which you want to manage that type of contracts. If you start with a CLM and you're having a scattered type of contracts that you manage, so not of a particular kind, but it's a sort of all of everything, then a general non-allocated contract sheet might even be your own contract sheet. If you have a specific type of agreements that you have in a high frequency and would clutter your insight, so your overseeability and your manageability of contracts, then it makes a lot of sense that you create a separate CLM contract sheet for that type of contract. Think of, for example, NDAs. You don't necessarily want to have all your NDAs throughout all the other agreements, and you probably also want to allocate distributorships and agencies onto separate contract sheets. Another example of type of contracts that you don't necessarily want to manage through the general contract sheets are your intra-company agreements. So those agreements that set up and arrange the relationships between the various companies worldwide, something particularly needed for tax purposes in an international or a multinational setting. Also, those type of agreements, you don't want them to be managed under general non-allocated contracts. What happens if you set up a contract sheet is that you can apply your contract creation templates and apply them exclusively for that contract sheet. So if an end user moves a contract creation questionnaire and everything that relates to the contract entry into the CLM, it will always and automatically arrive on that contract sheet. Now, it's a little bit abstract maybe. A few final things before we start configuring a contract sheet, because you need to make some general configuration settings. For example, you could indicate where all the contracts in the CLM have to be stored. They might be stored in Weagree, but if you have set up integrations with external storage applications, and that could be SharePoint, for example, or a document management system, then you have to activate the API connections, integrations. You have to activate the document storage application that you would use, or SharePoint, and you will indicate over here that actually the CLM contracts are to be stored over there. You can activate the currency indicator if you find that relevant, and you can indicate what the default currency for your CLM contracts would be. For us, we've set it up for euro, but it may be that you're in a very different jurisdiction, or that you do the financial reporting of your organization in American dollars or British pounds or any other currency whatsoever. And you can select that one from the list over here, and that will be the default when you bring a contract into your CLM. It doesn't mean that you can't change it later on. It's the default setting. Then what you see over here is the migration service. As I said, this is a service that is addressed in a separate tutorial. Notifications is for the next training. So all the notifications that managed contracts in the CLM are to trigger deadlines that are coming up, an expiry that is coming up. All those types of dates trigger notifications, and how to configure the notifications is the subject matter of the next admin training after this once. You can configure risk types in relation to the risk assessment of contracts. Also, that is the topic of a separate tutorial. Now it's time to manage our contracts, and the use case that I've set up, and you won't be surprised, is that we are going to make sure that the evaluation license agreements that we've been creating are going to be managed on a separate CLM contract sheet for evaluation licenses. Think of it that when you answer the questionnaire for an evaluation license agreement, then you're actually collecting quite a number of data by your answers that are somehow likely to be the data on which you want to manage your contracts in the CLM. And of course, if you enter them already in the questionnaire, then you don't want to re-enter them when registering a contract in the CLM. Of course, negotiations may lead to some changes in what you had answered in your first draft of the agreement, but in practice, 80% of the details are probably already there, and you just want to map them, as it is called, onto the CLM contract sheet. So, we are going to create a contract lifecycle management contract sheet based on an evaluation license agreement as we have already set it up. What do we do now? First of all, you click on the icon here, create a CLM contract sheet. It asks me to give a name to the contract sheet, and evaluation licenses is the name that I'm going to give to the CLM contract sheet, and I can indicate here that the contract sheet is by default to be based on the template evaluation license agreements. I pick it from the list. This is the template that we've been building up in the previous training sessions, so you know the fields that you would expect. And if I save the changes right now, first of all, it creates the contract sheet. And then it's asking me through this pop-up which Q&A questions I would like to use to manage the evaluation license agreements towards the future. It asks, it lists all the fields here that are derived from the evaluation license agreement. You probably recognize them already. It allows me to subselect this list, so filter out certain Q&A questions or certain fields that I find are irrelevant because those relate to, for example, Q&A questions in the attachments, Q&A questions triggered in definitions. It's not very likely that I want to filter them out, but that's also why they are actually listed. It might even hide linked Q&A questions. That's a curious one at this stage because this is our first template that we are bringing into the CLM contract sheet. But if you are going to link a subsequent second template or a third template to this overview, then you actually want to hide already linked Q&A questions because they are already arriving or mapped to this contract sheet, as well as local Q&A question and any global question. So unhide or hide Q&A questions if you find them. Maybe there's later on an example. I would like to check all the fields for the evaluation license agreements. I find the signing date not that relevant because we already have an effective date, which I think is more relevant for our purposes. And then what we could do is the automatic extensions. Well, let's see how it's going to work out. Additional license fee, other license period, it all looks fine. Whether restrictions and ownership related aspects apply, applicable law is something relevant, jurisdiction, and the Arbitration Institute second signatory block, whether that's needed is not something relevant for the contract lifecycle management, so I uncheck that one. If I click on OK, it basically picks up all the fields and it brings them under the header over here, unallocated. What do we have right now on the screen? On the left-hand side, you recognize the outline of a contract sheet where the parties, the repository, and the persons and teams involved are listed. These are the ones that are always there. A contract, after all, has parties. In a CLM, you're managing your contracts, so there's a repository, and you want to know which persons and teams are actually involved or have access. You don't necessarily need to do anything with it. You might even add fields. If, for example, you're asking here Q&A questions about contact persons, you might want to add those persons to the parties or to the persons and teams involved. Under the unallocated item, we see on the right-hand side all the fields that were retrieved basically from the template questionnaire. And of course, lots of them related to the evaluation license agreement, that's as it is indicated, but some of them are a global question, like on sub-licensing, which we added to the global questions list. Now, the next step would basically be that I'm going to define, first of all, the items on which I also want to manage the agreement. So, for example, the scope of evaluation. I'm creating the item and I would like to add certain aspects that relate to the scope of the evaluation license. I also want to manage the evaluation license agreement for term and termination. And the aspects that relate to term and termination will later on be brought underneath here. And then there may be some legal parameters on which I also want to manage the fields. I put them on the bottom because they are typically only relevant in the case of a dispute when the legal parameters like applicable law or the assignability of contract change of control clauses are becoming relevant. Now, I'm going to fill the fields. This is the number of end users, the license period. It has to do with term and termination. And I'm going to check those aspects which I believe are, and then there's some amount of the license fee, additional license fee, clause inclusion, basically asking whether there could be an additional license fee, probably upon extension of the evaluation license period, and I'm moving these fields that I've just selected to the scope of evaluation. So those fields are now listed over here, and I'm going to address them later on. For now, I leave them over there. And what I now want to do is I'm going to fill the term and termination part. So everything that relates to timing and termination or extension of the agreement should be brought underneath this item. That would be the effective date, the license period, automatic extensions, some other about the license period, other things relate to the legal aspects, I would say. So I'm moving this to term and termination. And then probably restrictions on ownership is something about the legal aspect. And then the arbitration institute and applicable law are aspects that are legal. I don't find this relevant. It's a sort of elaboration in the confidentiality clause of I think it doesn't make much sense over here, so I'm removing it from unallocated. Now, and then we have organized our data in the CLM contract sheet. And basically, if I'm now going to move a contract into the CLM, basically I will find these data mapped the way I outlined them over here. If I want to add a second template to this same evaluation license contract sheet, that's not likely for this type of contract, but if you have your distributorships or you have your supply chain contracts, you might want to have all your procurement related templates to be linked over here and mapped to these fields. Then I want to indicate or be able to see certain types of data or metadata relating to my evaluation licenses, and that could be the contract status, which is whether it's terminated or active, the contract number, if I find that relevant. For evaluation licenses, I find the contract number less relevant, so I leave it unchecked. The urgency may be relevant because an evaluation license is at some point going to expire, and upon the expiry, I want to take some action. So I want to see in my overview that it has high priority. Is it important to know who's the owner of the contract? I think so. Organizational units that are involved, that could be relevant, as well as the user groups. Currency and contract value are of little relevance in the case of evaluation licenses. I only want to have the evaluation licenses under this contract sheet, and that's actually also going to be the consequence as long as I'm not going to link the evaluation license agreement template to another contract sheet. So I don't want the end user to be able to switch the contract sheet at all. note to self that might be useful, and data retention period. I think we can live with the default settings for the system, so I uncheck the thing. An additional remark, if you did check this or you left it check, what you could do is set the retention period in years as opposed to the signing date of the contract. But as I said, for evaluation license agreements, the automated deletion of data can be managed by the general settings of the CLM. So I leave this unchecked. Don't forget to save the changes. That's quite important. Otherwise you won't see it, what you unchecked. Then regarding notifications, that's for the next tutorial. For the risk assessment, how you want to risk assess evaluation licenses to be entered into is also for the next tutorial. And I now only have to look into a few aspects that I find over here. What Weagree has automatically done is quite a nice one. It identified that the choice questions relating to automatic extensions were tags that had the same name. So it thought, and rightfully so, that the choice questions, which appeared on 3 places, and that has to do with the fact that the duration is one of 3 durations. If I click license period, choice field, you can see that actually there are 3 fields with a certain period, allowing also to automatically extend. So those 3 fields connected to these 3 ones over here are basically mapped onto one CLM field, being automatic extensions. It will have the explanation note next to it about the term of the agreement to be extended automatically. An other license period, that's just an open text field. This is how you configure the contract lifecycle management of Weagree. And your next step would be, it is marked magenta. This has to do with the fact that apparently the mapping was not fully one-on-one done for one reason or another. And if you open it by clicking on the magenta link, you will see that basically the mapping has not been completed. Okay, let's now see what the result is when you actually move a questionnaire, a contract that has been agreed, into the CLM. So I have answered the questionnaire for an evaluation license agreement, and I want to manage this, register this in the CLM. Let's see what happens. I select the contract, I click manage. It gives me the a warning for whether this indeed is what I want to achieve, and then it proposes the various actions that I want to take and the various key metadata that apply to this contract. For example, I might want to set it on medium priority. The signing date is presumably tomorrow. The background of this is evaluation of our technology. Contract value, I find it less relevant, and then I leave a note to self being, I can indicate for each and every document in this file whether I want to have that directly accessible or with the status archived, sort of not directly accessible but still in the repository, or not in the repository at all by deleting it. I leave it here as it is only one document to be directly accessible. Click manage, and it brings me now to the contract sheet that we've just been creating. If you look at it, this is the overview page that you saw earlier. Here's the description that I've just entered, evaluation of our technology. And as you can see, it automatically fills in the scope of evaluation as it was answered. And I can basically review now whether these data are indeed what we have agreed and not merely those that I've entered during the answering of the questionnaire. And if I confirm, I would go through it next. I can indicate what the effective date is. Apparently that was not filled in during the questionnaire. I have the possibility to confirm whether the legal parameters are indeed these ones. And after that, basically, you would have the full overview ready and the contract is added to the CLM. As you can see, it's over here. And if I click on the description, it's back again. And I can see those parameters as I would like to see them. And this is all you need to know. If you believe there are a few things that you might adjust when you see them. For example, the presentation of certain options may not be the way you like it. If you want to modify them, you go again back to the administrator page. You seek the CLM contract lifecycle management contract sheets. What you can see is now that the evaluation licenses contract sheet contains one contract. If I had made a typo, you can basically correct the typo simply by changing it over here and click Save. And if I want to modify one of the fields or one of the things that as I've entered them over here, I could do that over here. For example, if I had dispute resolution options, but I wanted them to show in the list, not as a drop-down list, but as radio buttons, for example, or if I want the end users to force a Q&A answer because it might be missing, you can add them over here. If the explanation note that relates to the field is not clear enough, you can change the text over here and then maybe even add options if they are capable of being negotiated but not offered during the questionnaire. Save the changes. You will then see in the CLM for evaluation licenses that the legal parameters, whoops, I see that I haven't done that. So if you want to change the parameters of the dispute resolution to be not in a drop-down, but for example, shown as radio buttons, then click Save. And if you then go to the CLM and look again at the evaluation license under legal parameters, what you will see is that the presentation of this field has become one of drop-down. That is what I wanted to show you about configuring the Weagree wizard. Your next tutorial training sessions will be on configuring notifications.